What's up, card folk and wargamers alike? My name is Dex, and today we're going to be starting a new mini-series on this channel. In this series, we're going to be ranking everything in Legacy's Allure, which is quite a lot of stuff. We've got buffs and debuffs, we've got heroes and abilities, we've got items, and we've got all the units in the game. There's a lot to rank, of course. So hopefully the idea of this series is just to give some new players some thoughts and insights from a rather experienced player. I'm not going to say I'm a good player, but I am an experienced player. And what's good in the game, what to use, how to use it. I'm going to be talking about the units as I go through them. And for the more experienced veteran players, this is going to be a nice thing that you can shout at me for when I get it wrong. So once I've ranked all of these in the mini-series, I'm going to put them all in a big compendium video, which you can watch in the future. But for now, what we're going to do is cover the buffs and debuffs. So let's get started. So for the buffs and debuffs, there are about 39 of these in the game. We're just ranking them in S, A, B, C, D tier, where D tier is like shockingly horrible, and S tier is really, really good. And yeah, you know how tier lists work. I don't need to explain it to you. So I've organized these buffs in a way that's going to make sense as we go through them. So let's just get started. +1 power. These are the tactician buffs we're beginning with. So +1 power, +1 range, +1 movement, and pathing. These are all buffs that the tactician card can give, which is a 4 gold card in Arangard. So +1 power can also be achieved through other cards. Other factions have access to it. So Troll Shaman in Gath, as well as Goblin Lackey. Troll Berserker has the ability to give itself +1 power. I don't think anything in Sylvan has access to this, though. So +1 power is it's a bit of a meh kind of ability. It's like, sure, you can get extra power, and it can sometimes get that little bit of extra damage you need, but beyond that, it's an extra damage, sure, but I wouldn't be spending a 4 gold tactician on this when I have access to other abilities. It's alright on Goblin Lackey. I'm not sure I'm a fan of it. I would not use my Goblin Lackeys for +1 power ever, to be honest, because healing for 1 is super useful, and charging for 2 damage is just straight up better. But if you want to sacrifice for +1 power, then sure, if it gets you the extra damage you need. But that's where I'm at with this. I'm going to put it in B tier, because it's nice if you can get the extra damage you need, but I'm not really convinced that it's worth anything beyond that. But when we go through to the other tactician buffs, +1 range and +1 movement and pathing, wow, these are strong buffs. +1 range is probably the weakest of, no, maybe it's the second weakest. It's a solid A tier buff, right? Because it particularly synergizes well with Catapult. You can end up with 5 range on that thing, which is just silly. Yeah, 5 range, threat range with 3 damage is just super powerful. And you can get that with +1 range. It's good. +1 movement, I'd argue, is in a similar tier, maybe a bit better than range, because moving is really important in this game. The board is quite small, so you really need the ability to move around everywhere, and +1 movement gets that for you with giving it to your knights, for example. You then have 4 movement charging knights, which is insane. It's completely crazy and super hard to get away from, especially if you're using an Ultra Knight or something. That's a threat range of 4 with 5 power on an Ultra Knight is crazy. And pathing, I'm going to put just below +1 movement. I'm actually going to put +1 movement in S tier. I think it's that good. Pathing is also super useful. It's more of a gotcha kind of thing, but it's all about making sure you can go through your enemy's walls, right? Or if you're Arangard, which is the only way to access this ability, is the only way you can break through your own walls if you've made mistakes in the past. It's a tiny bit of a gotcha buff, because it's hard to build walls, and if you're building walls and suddenly your enemy's like, I've got pathing now, that it can be annoying. I get it. But that's just why it's kind of good. Gets you out of some sticky situations, and pathing is effectively flying, and cards that can fly over into the backline is super strong. So just putting pathing on something like a knight allows you to charge into the backline, take out those three health spellcasters. Something like Anwin or Carthel is really huge if you can get rid of those, if they're not protected properly. And pathing can do that for you. Talking through it, I kind of want to put it in S tier as well. I'm not sure I can, though, just because of the range restriction on the Tactician. Right, now we're into the 4 debuffs of the game that I consider most important. These are Rooted, Broken, Silenced, and Disarmed. The way I like to think of these is Rooted removes your movement, Broken removes your passive abilities, Silenced removes your active abilities, and Disarmed removes your power. It's just removing the 4 most inherent things from your cards, hence they are the base debuffs, kind of. Now, the thing about a debuff is it's inherently weaker than a buff, because all healers have the ability to just remove a debuff. If you're like, no, I want to be able to use that unit this round, if it's rooted, you can just remove that debuff. But if you're Sylvan and you're throwing enough debuffs around the board, then it can be super powerful and overwhelming, and you might only be able to remove one of those debuffs, or you might have more of a priority on healing something with that healer. So these debuffs can be super effective still. Rooted is really nice. It disables a unit for a turn, but I think I want to put it in A tier as well, but I'm going to have to shift these down a little at the end, because I think I've put everything very high up. But Rooted is just good, to be honest. It stops something moving. That's one more unit you don't have to worry about this round. It's good. There's no question about it. Broken, however. Broken is probably the best in the game, in my opinion. Broken is super, super strong. You can disable the passive abilities of an enemy unit. And so many things in Sylvan can access this. You can access it with the Silverglade cards, you can access it with the Sorcerers, and you can get it with the Wisp, which is only 2 gold. You're spending 2 gold to break something. That is a unit that can't charge this round. That is a unit that has not got armor this round. It has so many applications, and it's so important to be able to get through things like armor as Sylvan, that you need this in any Sylvan list. It's super important. With that, we're going to move on to Silence, which is... It's also S tier. I feel bad putting so many things so high up so quickly. We might have to shift them down, but Silence is also really good, because so many builds in the current meta that I'm playing in, they are very focused on buffing something with the use of another card. So something like Troll Shaman is a really good example, where you can give your goblins or your scourgs charging +1 power, and Silence is just an answer for that, where you can say, no, you're not doing that this round. Your entire strategy is just out of the window. It's huge on spellcasting heroes. Aurelia can't glory or stop things being attacked. Carthel can't do anything, nor can Anwin if they're silenced. It's huge. And more often than not, Silenced is 4 range, which is much, much better than the 3 range of the other debuffs on things. And every faction has access to Silence. Always have a silencing unit in your kingdom, in my opinion. So if you're Arangard, that's Spellbreaker. If you're Gath, that's Vesuvian Warlock. And if you're Sylvan, you should have a Norfang Sorcerer anyway. They're super important to the faction. And yeah, use this ability. It's so good. It doesn't look as important as both Rooted and Broken, but it is so, so huge. Anyway, with that, we are now moving to Disarmed. This is This is B tier for me, and I'm going to tell you why. It's a bit better than +1 power, but it's often really hard to pull off a disarm unless you're playing Tristan, because the only unit with access to it is Enforcer, and Enforcer can only combine it with 1 movement, so it's really tough to pull off. And worse than that, it's also a debuff, so you can just remove it, and it can be completely gone. And yeah, it can disable one of the most aggressive melee units that they might have access to, and you can kill it without being retaliated against, but it's not really something that should be central to your strategy, and I think it's something that's begging to be central to your strategy. It's usually just removed anyway, so whatever. Right, now we are on to the Troll Shaman buffs. These are really interesting. So you've got Piercing, Charging, and Ignores Steadfast. These are all things that the Troll Shaman can give. It can also give damage reduced to 0, but we'll talk about that later, because the Troll Shaman kills its unit after it's cast this spell on it, so the damage reduced to 0 just sort of ensures that that unit can do something for 1 round, which is useful, for sure, but it's much more important to talk about on Tranquility, which is Anduin's spell that gives it. But Piercing, Charging, and Ignore Steadfast, they are interesting. So Piercing I'm going to put in B tier, but I'm going to put it at the top of B tier, because it's strong, but it's super situational. That's the thing. It's a strong buff that also the Tethys Fletcher can give, which isn't so relevant because you don't see that many range Sylvan strategies, so it's kind of whatever. But being able to get it on your Scourgs and get through the armor that Knights have is a really good alternative to using Gath instead of imbued units. But it's super situational. You have to be targeting a Knight for it to really matter. Otherwise, who cares? Charging, though, S tier buff for sure. I'm hesitant to put it in front of either of these 2 debuffs because they're so good, but it gives an insane threat range. And the reason I'm not putting it above the buffs is because the unit dies afterwards. That's the only way to currently access charging. You're either using Battle Fury, which reduces its damage to 1, so it's essentially going to die anyway, or you're using Troll Shame, which will kill it next round. But the huge threat range you can gain with units that couldn't otherwise charge, like Scourg, Hellions, and Archers, it's really good. And sure, they're going to die afterwards, but you've dealt a huge amount of point damage because you've also got +1 power on those guys, which I know I said was B tier, but it's every little bit of extra damage helps. It's only really when considering Tactician that this is B tier, which kind of makes me want to move it up, but I'm going to keep it where it is for now. Ignore Steadfast. This is a C tier buff because so few units in this game are Steadfast that actually matter. I think we've got Bull Elk, you've got anything, whatever Arbor Mage is doing, because that can cast the Steadfast buff. You've got Pikemen and Halberdiers, which you don't see very often, and Crag Behemoth. So ignoring Steadfast is mostly relevant here to deal with Bull Elk, which is a single card, and otherwise meh. Like, maybe against Crag Behemoth it can be useful, but you're killing your dudes to give yourself this buff, and it's only going to be worth it, in my opinion, if you're dealing significant amounts of damage to a Bull Elk, which would otherwise be hard to deal with. So it's so situational that it's C tier. It doesn't quite make it to D tier because it is useful, but it's so unbelievably situational. Steadfast as a buff, so we're getting into the Arbor Mage buffs now. We've got Steadfast, Physical Damage Return, and Spellproof. So Steadfast, yeah, I know I said ignore Steadfast is kind of meh, but giving Steadfast, that's way better. B tier top, I want to say, possibly bottom of A tier, because you can deal with it normally, and because archers and things can just shoot whatever is in the send. If you're giving Steadfast to something, it's either to save it in an emergency or drop it on the center. I think I want to put it, yeah, we'll put it here for now. We'll have a look at it later. It's really nice to be able to save a unit, right? And sometimes Steadfast can do that. I think Physical Damage Return does it better. But it's more useful to just be annoying and get in the way of whatever your opponent was planning. I've seen Thorn Elementals with Steadfast in the center, and it's really difficult to approach them because they deal 4 damage. So yeah, it's good, but for 6 gold, meh, it doesn't quite, it's not good on the level that the rest of the buffs above it are. Physical Damage Return is in a very similar place. I'm going to put it just underneath, but above Piercing. Piercing I'm actually going to move to C tier because of how situational it is. It's in a similar place to Ignore Steadfast. Yeah, Physical Damage Return is very much a Hail Mary to save a unit that you've put in trouble. And there's things that do that better in this game, like Anwin and Tranquility, which you'll have access to if you're in Sylvan, which you will be, because Physical Damage Return can only be achieved by using an Arbor Mage right now. Yeah, basically you can just say, okay, that unit is in too much of a troublesome spot, and you can deal too much damage, so I'm going to use Physical Damage Return so that I deal some damage back to you if you still choose to do that. But the thing is, they can just ignore it, and you've saved a unit, sure, but whatever was going to attack it is just going to attack something else, so it doesn't matter so much. Moving on to Spellproof. Spellproof is a bit naff, to be honest. It's top of C tier, I'd say, because it does exactly the same thing that Physical Damage Return, Steadfast, and Spellproof, well, Physical Damage Return and Steadfast do. It saves a unit from death, but it's way more situational than that. Like, Spellproof on a card is great. Green Dragon and Thorn Elemental, it's super hard to deal with them, particularly Thorn Elemental, because of Spellproof. But usually you would only put Spellproof on a unit as a last resort, because you see, oh shoot, they've got something that can deal that much damage, and it's a spell. I need to put Spellproof on it now. It's not usually impactful to gameplay. I've never seen it used. It's not D tier, it's too useful in certain situations for that, but it's not great. Ignore Spellproof, however, I'm going to put at the top of B tier, just above Disarmed, because this is central to some Arangard strategies. We're back onto Arangard now. We're talking about Spell Cradle Seraph, because ignore Spellproof, Spell Power, and Cast Range. Ignoring Spellproof is super useful if you're using something like a Battering Ram, a Grand Wizard, an Adept Tempest Mage. Tristan is another example. If you're wanting to deal with Thorn Elemental or Green Dragon or any of the Silverglade stuff, you need to be able to ignore Spellproof with some very central Arangard strategies, because your Battering Ram's just going to be shut down if you can't use it. And being able to get through that, having that card in your kingdom that can just say, okay, you've got a Spellproof card, now you don't have Spellproof against this unit that I select this round. It's a good buff. It's situational, sure, but it's something that you need. Spell Power is in a similar place to +1 power for me. It's just extra damage, whatever. If you can get enough damage off to kill the unit, then it's good, but only then is it really that good. It's worse than +1 power because there's so many less things that it's applicable to. So it's only really applicable to the Tempest Mages, the Grand Wizard, and Aurelia's Sunstrike. And yeah, it's good on a ranged build for Aurelia when you can just Sunstrike something that's dead, but otherwise meh. But cast range, extra cast range is very similar to +1 range on a Tactician, except you have to go for a mage build to care, and mage builds aren't that good because you have so many squishy units. It's really nice to have this on Frost Maiden. If you can pull off a Frost Maiden strat, then yeah, cast range, absolutely solid. But otherwise, yeah, you're using you're using wizard strategies. If you're using this card, this buff, then it's kind of whatever. So I'm going to drop this somewhere near +1 range, because +1 cast range is good, don't get me wrong, but like what it is applicable to is way, way less than +1 range is. So I'm going to put this, yeah, it's not as good as ignoring spellproof because it's not usually as important, and it's not as good as disarming. So yeah, I'm going to put it there. Magic resist. Oh, I really like this, but I think I might be a bit biased because I have learned to really like spellbreakers recently. Magic resist can save a unit just straight up. It's like saying, okay, you can no longer deal magic damage to me. And that's such a gotcha for certain kingdoms that are focused on magic damage. Something like dragons in Gath. If someone is playing 2 black dragons, or loads of dragon hatchlings, or goblin bombs, or Carthel, just saying, I have magic resist now, you can't kill that unit, is so good. It's really good. I'm going to put it in A tier, under-rooted, because rooting is super useful, but yeah, I like it a whole lot better than I like the other things that can just save things, like Steadfast, Physical Damage Return, and Spellproof, because it counters so many more things. Speaking of countering and saying, no, you can't deal damage to me, we've got the wizard debuffs, I like to think of them as. -1 power, it's C tier, to be honest. It's like +1 power in the fact that it only works if the numbers add up in the right way. But it's a debuff as well, so it can be removed. The only reason you're throwing it around is because you've got 2 gold apprentice wizards just to fill in your 2 golds. And at that point, it's kind of like, would I rather have a squire that can just deal 2 damage with a little bit of a threat? And yeah, I'd probably rather take a squire now. I might take an apprentice wizard. It's got solid cast range, but whatever. -2 power, however. This isn't actually -2 power because it comes attached to the Grand Wizard. Because the Grand Wizard can cast -1 power, -2 power, -3, all the way up to -7. So this is actually kind of more like -X power. And for that reason, this is really good. This is like, it's definitely A tier because it's the same. I'm gonna put it just above magic resist, but below rooted. This is really good because you can just be like, okay, you can no longer kill the unit that you could otherwise kill, and you choose how much you can not kill the unit by, I suppose. You just sort of save something, and it's completely safe. And one of their units isn't able to act. It's like disarming, but a bit more impactful in some ways, I guess, because of the cast range. The only problem is it comes attached to a very expensive unit, Grand Wizard, at 15 gold, which has only got 3 health. So, meh, it could just die, but whatever. -1 movement, though, that is just as solid in the same way, but it comes attached to Frost Maiden, which I've never seen used effectively. I'm not saying it can't be done. I would really like to see it. I'm going to put this... If I isolate thinking about the buff of -1 movement, it's almost as good as -power. It's better than Steadfast, because stopping enemies moving around is huge, as you're going to see when we get to some of the movement abilities. So I'm going to put it here. I'm not sure. It might be a bit too high, but A tier it is. No healing or buffing. This is the Vesuvian Warlock, I believe, gives this debuff. It's a D tier debuff. It's so weird and situational. I've never seen this used effectively with the Vesuvian Warlock. It comes attached to a card that can do better things and more important things. I don't remember entirely, but I think it can root a unit. But more importantly, it can silence units, and that's why you take the Vesuvian Warlock. Exhaust on attack. This is attached to the Skorg Sorcerer in Gath. What it does is when a unit with this buff next attacks, it exhausts the unit that it attacks. I'm going to put this in C tier, and I'm going to put it above everything. Yeah, I'm going to put it at the top of C tier, because it's good, but the Skorg Sorcerer has a much better ability, which I'm going to get to. It's basically a version of exhausting. When you can taunt an enemy and say, come here and attack you, that's way better to do than exhausting a unit, because it's already exhausting. If you're taunting an enemy, you're exhausting them, and you're moving them to a place that you want. Whereas exhausting a unit when you attack it is conditional on whether you actually attack the unit. So that's where I'm at with this one. Now, cannot be attacked and damage reduced to 0. Wow, these are crazy. These are completely crazy buffs. These just straight up save a unit. It's really, really good. Aurelia and the Dawnbringer Paladin have the ability to stop units from being attacked. That is low S tier. Maybe I'm going to move -1 movement down a bit, and I'm going to put Pathing above it, I think. But yeah, can't be attacked. It's better than all of these. You just say, okay, this unit can't be attacked, and then you throw it into their backline. They can't do anything about it. So you've just now put a Knight or an Ultra Knight or something in their backline, threatening whatever 3 health spellcasters they have, and they can do next to nothing about it, unless they can deal magical damage to it with spells or something. And that's when we get to damage is reduced to 0, easily the best buff in the game. Oh my goodness, this is so good. This is achieved through Tranquility with Anwin, also the Troll Shaman, but we've already covered why it's kind of meh on that. But if you Tranquility something like a Bull Elk or a Hippogriff Archer, you then throw it up into their backline. They can't do anything about it. This thing reduces all damage to 0, except for pure damage, of course, but that's the exception. And it doesn't matter whether it's spell damage or attack damage, just nothing happens. So it's just straight up better than can't be attacked, and it does the same thing. So yeah, easy S tier for me. Now we've got the shields, shield 1, 2, and 3. And yeah, these are solid. It's always good to have an extra shield. It's just an extra pip of health. Why would I not want that? Shield 3 is an S tier shield. The problem is, it's attached to Archangel, which is 15 gold just to achieve getting this buff, which is a bit much. So considering the card that it's attached to, I'm only going to put this in lowish A tier. I'm going to put it, yeah, just here, I think. Whereas Shield 2 is much more achievable. You get it with a regular Angel, which is only 10 gold. That's a lot more common in army setups, and it's really good. Just having 2 extra health, being able to throw in a unit and say, this is going to be hard for you to kill, now deal with it. It gives the unit more opportunity to retaliate if it's ever attacked against. It's just extra survivability. It's always useful. So that's going to go higher than 3 shield, actually, purely for the fact that it's more common. It's still not as good as the rest of the stuff above it. And then I think I'm going to lump the shields actually together just to make it a bit easier on me. 1 shield is going to go here because it's more common than 3 shield, and it's also just generally useful. And actually, honestly, 1 shield is so common. Maybe I should put it above 2 shield, because here's the thing. It's really cheaply available. Actually, it's available to everyone. It starts in the center hex. Also, Anwin can cast it for Nature's Bosom to save a unit. And also, shield bearers have it. And that's the important thing. 3 gold, you get 1 shield. And that saves your Arangard spellcasters, your priests, your frost maidens, your tacticians. Those are all completely safe from Gladehawk now. And that is huge, because Gladehawk is such a staple unit for Sylvan and only costs them 2 gold. You need to be able to save those backline healers. So yeah, 1 shield, why would I not take it? It's so good. Now, we're on to Burn. Burn is a weird one, because it's future damage that can be removed as a debuff. And honestly, Burn 1 and Burn +1, The only ways you achieve them are the Vesuvians, so the Warlock and the Archer, and they're not good, to be honest. It's just 1 damage that you have to wait to get. I'd rather just have an extra damage on those units. Sure, it's magic damage, which is always nice, but they're imbued units anyway. It's not that useful. It's in a similar place to +1 power, but it's way less common, and it keeps their unit alive. Why would I want this? Burn 2, however, the Firefist Minotaur and the Hellbear. This is... it's okay, I suppose. I think I would put it above +1 power and cast range. The thing is, burn 2 is essentially 3 damage if they don't heal it, which means it's always going to get healed. But that means you're forcing them to not heal this round instead. So essentially you've dealt the 2 damage anyway, kind of, I guess, and they've just had to heal it. So yeah, burn 2 is always going to get removed. Don't get me wrong on that. You will very, very rarely see the burn actually go through. But that's kind of the point. And yeah, it's useful because of that. And don't get me wrong, it's 2 damage if it does go through. That can kill a knight. A Hellbear can one-hit a knight if the knight isn't healed first. It's useful. But now we're getting into the stuff that isn't technically buffs or debuffs. So these can't be removed usually. These are mostly movement effects, and they're super useful generally because movement is good. Exhausting a unit, straight up S tier. That's a unit that just can't do anything, and there is only one way in the game to be able to have that unit do something again. I'm going to put it above Silenced because it's similar to Silenced but better. Yeah, exhausting a unit. That's a unit that can't act anymore. That's just value to me. The Tempest Mages do it great. And you can also taunt units with the Satyr or the Scourge Sorcerer. And then they're also out of position when you exhaust them. It's so much value. But then +1 action. This is the direct counter to exhausting. The only way you can get +1 action, except for some hero abilities that allow the hero themselves to get it, is Anwin's Quicken spell, which there's a reason that thing is so expensive. If you're getting +1 action on something like a Bull Elk, yeah, I'm going to put this right at the top. It's above damage reduced to 0. +1 action on a Bull Elk. That Bull Elk is acting twice that round. That means it can charge twice. That means it can deal 8 damage in 1 round maximum. That's huge. It's just so good, and it counters completely one of the biggest debuffs in the game, which is being exhausted. Now, Roar and Hookshot, these sort of come as a pair. They're accessible in different ways. Roar, you need a bear, or kind of a battering ram has a similar effect, but not quite the same. Yeah, Roar is okay. You can push a unit out of position. I think it's okay enough, actually, to be A tier, because... And... yeah, above the shields. The problem is you can just move back to wherever you've been rolled away from. It's only effective in certain scenarios, but board control is super useful, and that's what Roar gives you. If there's a Crag Behemoth on the center, roar it away, it's gone. But more importantly, Ursa Mage's Greater Roar, where you can push a unit 2 hexes away. That's the important Roar ability that you need to worry about. You can actually use that in such a way that you can push a unit into your own front line that might already be exhausted. That's super good value. You can also use it to push things away and harass them and bully them into a corner. That's really useful. It's just so much board control being able to move a unit 2 hexes. So Roar is above shields, but I haven't got one for Greater Roar here. Greater Roar would probably be an S tier ability. Now, Hookshot. I was talking about Greater Roar being good for pulling things into your front line. Hookshot does exactly that. But it's only really good if you have a really good ranged unit. And Sylvan does have one of those. It has several really good ranged units, but what I mean is a super long ranged unit. it's got the Tethir Bowmaster, which you have to pay 14 gold for to do 2 damage at 4 range, and then 3 more gold to be able to hook shot. Now I'm paying 17 gold to be able to access this, and it's really good to be able to pull something into your front line. It's so good, because you can then just damage it to death. It can't do anything if it's exhausted. Thing is, you have to wait for the unit to be exhausted for this to be relevant, otherwise they'll just move away, and it's so expensive. I care about it less because of that. I'm going to put it just here underneath Burn 2, I think, if it'll let me. There we go. Now we are into the final 3. We've got 2 things that the Norfang Enchantress can cast, which is controlling an enemy through your next turn, or making a hex unusable, essentially. It's called untouchable. So controlling an enemy is okay, but the problem is the cast range and not being combinable makes it super hard to pull off, and then you have to use it next turn. So if they present a threat, then after that, then it doesn't matter that you've controlled the enemy, because you have something more important to deal with. So controlling the enemy, meh. It's a bit too hard to pull off for my liking. If you can control a black dragon or something, and then force it to flame sweep into enemy lines, that's great. But your enemy's never going to let you pull that off. So for that reason, it's going in C tier for being far too situational. Above the other things that are slightly more situational, because it is attached to... No, never mind, it's going below, because it's attached to a bad card, and these 2 are attached to good cards, in my opinion. Speaking of the other ability on a Norfang Enchantress, it's Untouchable. Now, I think this is really weird. It basically stops enemy units from moving through a hex, and I thought about it for a while. I thought, that's weird, why would I ever use that? And then I realized... Untouchable means that you can put a friendly unit in that hex, and it can't be attacked by melee units. Now you put this on a Thorn Elemental, and what have you got? A Thorn Elemental that you can't cast spells at because it's spellproof, you can't deal physical damage to because of physical damage return, and you can't do a melee attack. That is so unbelievably hard to deal with. But this only really works in that combo, because otherwise, why am I using Untouchable rather than an Arbor Mage, which is about twice as cheap as this Norfang Enchantress? So with that combo, yes, this is really good, but otherwise, it's kind of a C tier ability, just above... I think it's top of C tier, if you're using it in any other way. And last but not least, I thought I'd end with quite an easy little... ability, which is just to heal a unit. You can say, okay, 2 damage, that's gone. That's standard for all healers. It's about 2 damage that you heal. And healing is so important in this game. Do not take an army without a healer, because you can deny all the maths the enemy's done, the opponent. You can be like, okay, you've added up all those units that can kill this unit in the center, and now I'm going to heal it, and you can't deal with it. So, yeah, it's S tier. You need to be able to heal, always. I'm going to put it just below being exhausting a unit. I think that's about where it's at. And, yeah, that's the tier list. I'm not sure what I think of it myself, because I just put this together. I had no thoughts about this beforehand, really. Yeah, that's where I'm at with all the buffs and debuffs. Thank you for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. All the links about Legacy's Allure, if you haven't played it or are unfamiliar, are in the description. And yeah, I'll see you for the next episode of the series. Thank you very much for watching.